European governments and institutions are faced with the most severe crisis since the Great Depression in the 1930s. And they are now facing the emergency situation before they go to the reconstruction situation. So far, governments and institutions have responded fairly well, in my view. Let's remind that among other things, the institutions have lifted the Stability and Growth Pact constraints to fiscal policy. They are modifying and making it lighter to abide with state aid regulations. And of course, the European Central Bank is providing a huge amount of liquidity and putting it on the table to guarantee that interest rates will remain low for long in this reconstruction phase. National governments have responded by tapping on their budget according to their relative fiscal space, which of course is not the same across the European countries. In my own country, the government is introducing a very huge effort, 55 billion euros, in addition to the 25 billion euros, which was decided a couple of months ago. The government is, at these very hours, is now discussing how to use that money. However, this is still less than what other governments have been able to do, given the fact that they have a stronger debt position. So the risk that is behind these operations is that after the recession is over and we're out to a more regular growth pattern, divergence will step in rather than convergence. So this is a risk that I see looming on the European reconstruction phase. Having said that, I think that governments have taken it very seriously. They're working head on. We'll see how it works. Let me remind that the European Recovery Fund is the last in line, so to speak, of a series of new institutions which have been put on the table and will certainly provide help to the reconstruction of Europe. The European Stability Mechanism, which has been providing a health care facility with no conditionality, which will provide up to 2% of GDP to countries that make a request for those unconditional loans. The SURE mechanism to provide short-term support to unemployment, which is going to be very large and important, so this is a welcome move. And of course, the widening of the guarantee firepower for the European Investment Bank for small and medium enterprises. Small and medium enterprises will have to make an effort in restarting growth and reinvesting in new technologies and sustainable finance. Having said that, the European Recovery Fund is the most ambitious program, which is now on the table of governments and the Commission. It will mobilize, according to early estimates, up to 1 or 1.5 trillion euros for investment. The issue is, to which instruments will that be done? Is it going to be partly loans and partly grants? Is it going to be also investment in equity to support small companies? This is, of course, more technical. What is important is that, according to what we know, the European Recovery Fund will hinge on the new and strengthened role of the European budget, which will provide guarantees even to joint European emissions, which is not the Eurobond, strictly speaking, but it's a beginning towards more European issuance. I mentioned earlier, one of the risks we're facing is that we get out of the crisis with more divergence within Europe. A divergent Europe will not stand the challenge of time. A divergent Eurozone will not stand the challenge of time. So we need policies and actions to increase convergence. And this was already in the program of the new Commission before the crisis broke out. This is going to be even more important to cohesion instruments and to cohesion resources that sometimes are not fully and well utilized. I hope that this is the opportunity to understand that there is a link between the Eurozone, between the single currency and the single market, which means stronger and more integrated national economies and not more divergent national economies. So this will be a challenge which will be very important as we get out of this terrible crisis. IMF and other international organizations here, I think, especially about regional development banks, will have a crucial role in emergency, especially the IMF, I would say, and reconstruction, especially the regional development banks and the World Bank. We will have to mobilize the global firepower in front of this crisis, which is not just European. Let's not forget about it. It's hitting hard other developed economies like the United States, but also emerging economies. So it's a really global emergency, and we need to strengthen both in terms of capital availability and in terms of possible new missions, all these institutions which are providing first line of defense against the crisis. So I do hope that global governance is usually strengthened by dealing with crisis, as we've seen with the G20 10 years back. Positive is certainly the fact that we are now getting much more into so-called smart working, which, by the way, means more working in my own experience, because there's no loose time between meetings now. But apart from that, which is only partly a joke, in a way, this corona crisis has accelerated the timing of technical reconstruction and technical change, which has been associated to digital technologies and sustainable growth. Now we have to do that more quickly, more deeply, and more convincingly, because once we deal with the liquidity emergency, the first phase, we have to ask ourselves, what is the working business investment consumption model we are looking at? Of course, one of the key components of these models will have to be how we deal with healthcare. Healthcare has provided, of course, first line of defense against the crisis. We know from experts in the field that pandemic diseases are there to stay, unfortunately. So we have to do more in terms of prevention, in terms of safety nets, and invest more. This will be challenging for governments and the private sector in ways that have to be reconciled effectively. In Europe, certainly this will be important, but also in other both developed and emerging economies. So we have learned that we have to face new challenges, and we have to do them united, not separated. More cooperation is also needed and welcome here.